Hi, welcome back to my 5-part series on conducting effective witness interviews that can maximize your client's results and your firm's revenue while helping to keep costs down so your client can keep more of the settlement amount you earned for her. In today's video, we're going to talk about how a successful interview works like a funnel, going from the more general to the more specific. 2, the importance of using reflective listening to get more info from the witness and to help document the information. Number 3, how to keep them talking as much as possible. And number 4, note-taking tips and approaches, as well as getting signed statements and declarations to overcome summary judgment motions. In the second video, we covered the elements of planning that go into a successful witness interview. In the third video, we covered the importance of building rapport to help ensure the interview is a success, and that also leaves the door open to follow up with the witness should you have missed any questions or have further questions down the road. In the fourth video, we discussed the objections to being interviewed that you're most likely to encounter, how to address those with the witness, and how to keep the door open with the witness to being interviewed down the road when an objection is powerful enough to keep the interview from occurring at that time. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin. I teach civil plaintiff law firms how to conduct effective litigation investigations that maximize their case results. I personally spent 30 plus years building cases for civil plaintiff attorneys in Los Angeles, California, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. During that time, I conducted over 12,000 witness interviews. I've taught hundreds of attorneys, paralegals, legal assistants, and law school students how to conduct more effective litigation investigations. And if you're ready to take your firm's witness interviews to the next level, I've got something special for you. It's my free PDF, 6 Steps to More Effective Witness Interviews that Maximize Your Case Outcomes. Just click on the link in the description below to download it now and get started today. And if you missed the earlier videos in this series, you can also find a link to them in the description below. Now, let's dig in. Now let's talk about the Q&A. Now keep in mind, remember, we talked about working from topics rather than from specific, all written out in advance questions. It's going to flow much better. It's going to work better. And in keeping with that, we always want to start general in broad terms rather than very specific. I want you to think about a witness interview as functioning like a funnel, where you're going to start with a bigger opening, let's say, and over time within the interview, you'll narrow down the specifics you need to get to. So when you start, a question like, what made you aware that something was going to happen, is really helpful. Or any type of general question. Remember, we want to get them talking. You'll have plenty of opportunity to kind of steer them back to the specific things you need to cover. But let them take it through from as general a category as possible. Once they've done that, then what you do is you'll say, earlier you mentioned X. I'd like to follow up on that. Can you tell me a little bit about this component of it? Or can you tell me a little bit further about that? Or let me make sure I understood you correctly. When you talked about X, this is what you said. Now, that leads into our next element of a successful interview process, and that's using reflective listening. Now, keep in mind, we talked about from the very beginning that listening is much more important when it comes to a successful interview than thinking about the questions you have to ask. It's not about asking the right question. It's about listening to what the interviewee is telling you. When I talk about reflective listening, that's essentially paraphrasing and then giving the person, after you've paraphrased back what they've said, the chance to go in a little bit more in depth with that information, to follow that a little bit more. An example in terms of, let's say it's an accident case, and they've taken you through, there are 2 car lengths back from the car, and one of the cars blows through a red light and causes this horrific crash. So what you would say is something like, let them take you through everything. I was driving and I saw this red car burn right through the light, and it hit that car, and it was awful, and my kids were screaming, and blah blah blah. But let them run with that, right? Then go, okay, let me see if I understand you correctly, and I'm gonna see if I can back you up here for a second. So you said you were about 2 car lengths back from the green car, and that you saw the red car come through a red light. So how do you know that the light was green for the green car that was in front of you? Then they'll say something like, because we were 2 lanes back, we had the green. I'm certain we had the green because we had started rolling forward. So great. So what you're saying is you started to roll forward, and then what happened? So as we started to roll forward, all of a sudden I saw out of the corner of my eye this red car coming at a really high rate of speed, and I knew there was no way this car was going to stop and that it was going to hit that green car. We're going to take it from the general, let them use the general, file it down, and then using reflexive listening that shows that you're actually hearing what they're saying. Now, this is really critical to a witness interview simply because witness interviews are about being heard. Most people simply want to be heard. They want to talk about this really horrific thing they've seen. They can't talk about it with their family. They can't talk about it with their friends. But you, as a dedicated professional involved in this, they can speak to about what they've seen. So this is your chance to give them that opportunity to be heard. All right, one of the critical components to a successful witness interview goes back to that notion of the more they keep talking, the more information you're going to get. So how do you keep them talking? Okay, one, we talked about reflexive listening, paraphrasing back, and then you become quiet. You're creating that vacuum that, as we talked about in the mindset hacks, nature abhors that vacuum. The longer you are able to sit in silence, the more the witness is going to fill in that silence. The more that person talks, the more information they're going to provide. Here's what happens. When we're silent and we're with somebody we don't really know, that person starts to feel a little bit awkward. An awkward silence is the term, right? So from that, to take care of the awkwardness, they're going to start talking. The more they talk, the better. We want to let them. Now, along the way, you want to navigate them, and the way that you do that, of course, is by saying to them, you mentioned previously X, let me go ahead and have you take me through that a little bit more about, so that I get a better understanding, right? You're putting it on yourself to make them give you more information by saying you need it for a better understanding. That's going to help to keep them talking. Obviously, rule number 1 of all interviews is no yes or no questions, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to give them a chance to do a narrative with each question that's asked of them. I always love, can you take me through it? As general as that can be, because they're not going to know what that means, so they're just going to start talking a lot. And that's very helpful. It can be, depending upon what process you use, and again, my preference is to either handwrite or type notes during the interview rather than to record it. But if you're going to be taking notes, my tips for you are you want to try to write or type the words they're using in the manner they use it, because down the road you may need it for a declaration or an affidavit or even a handwritten signed statement. You want to capture the words they use and how they say it. Now, how do you do that when you're not a stenographer? Well, we do a couple of tricks. If you are actually handwriting notes, don't bullet point, but write the words they say, skipping a line, and every once in a while, so you have a chance to catch up, use that little trick that we talked about of, can I back you up for a second, please? You said X. And as they're doing that, you're finishing writing out what they said. That's a really good way to keep pace with what they say. The other thing is, it's perfectly fine to sit there and just take notes. You don't have to speak. Let them do that, but continue to make eye contact, continue to acknowledge, with the head bob, something like that, that you hear what they're saying. A lot of times somebody will say, hey, are you able to keep up? Just tell them, yep, keep going, you're doing great. But while we're at it, can you kind of go into a little bit more detail about this one thing that you mentioned? And that way you're able to do it. Now, I also like repeating back to them, okay, wait a minute, you just said this, and let me just make sure I got it right. And then you repeat it back. That buys you the time, even if they don't fill in any more information, that buys you the time to write it down or to type up the information. But the key is to use their verbiage and their phrasing, right? If they say, the car ran the light, you want to write, the car ran the light. Yes, you want to go back and find out which car ran the light, but you want to write, the car ran the light, because when it becomes this handwritten signed statement or a declaration, and they say, I was at the light, I was 2 car lengths back, and that car ran the light, you want to be able to say that. But of course you want to build in from the other parts that you learned in the interview, the color of the car, where it was coming from, the speed it was traveling. But you want that, the car ran the light. You want that in there. In the old days, back when I first started as an investigator, we did all of our interview notes as handwritten, and I have really bad handwriting. So it was an ideal situation for me to say, hey, my handwriting's not great, and while all this is fresh in our minds, would it be okay if I wrote this up neatly and had you look it over and make sure it reflects what you told me? That's how I like to introduce a handwritten signed statement. Now, a handwritten signed statement can comply with 28 USC 1746 about unsworn statements. Right? It does not have to be typed, does not have to be an affidavit or declaration caption, but it does have to say something like, I so-and-so declare as follows, or I so-and-so state as follows, and then of course include the under penalty of perjury at the close. If it's going to be a declaration, then I think, and we can't do it right then and there, and that's pretty complicated, but if you're able to do it, then what I think you can say is, at some point I may want to type this up and have you take a look at it. Would that be okay? And if they look at you and they're like, sure, that's great. If they say, now why would you need to do that? You can say, because it's really important that I make sure and that we make sure that everything that you've told me is exactly as you've told me. And the best way to do that is for you to be able to do that. Now, if it's just a straight witness interview and you're just going to type up a witness summary and you don't need a declaration or an affidavit or a handwritten signed statement, at least not now, then you don't want them reviewing and affirming, because again, that's a little bit harder for the other side to get in discovery. A last little bit I want to talk about are interview summaries. Now, whether you type your interview notes, whether you record them, whether you do handwritten notes, in the end you need a summary. Now with a tape, they usually just do a transcript, but then you're picking and looking for all of the information you need, and it could be over here, it could be down here, it could be below about 20 before you get to what's critical. When you do a summary, what I like to do is hit the most important elements first, give each one of them a little heading, then go specifically right to, and again, kind of using their words, but not verbatim, what you believe to be most important in each of the different sections for what the witness had to say. That way, when someone else in your firm is reviewing that, they know what matters most importantly. Or let's say you're deciding who to depose because you really like their information and you feel it would be beneficial to get the case settled to actually bring them into a deposition. You'll have the information you want to ask them about. Or overall, if you're preparing a strategy for trial and now you need to know which witnesses can tell you and document and prove up specific issues, when you start with the important stuff for each witness, you have that right then and there in short paragraphs. If you go the old-fashioned way, which was the chronological way, which was start from the very first thing and take it all the way through to the end, then you have to pick through it and you have to find what matters, and then you have to remember those things. whereas a quick glance to a interview summary that goes by topic gives you the chance to be able to see what's important right off the bat. Thank you for tuning into this 5-part video series on how to conduct more effective witness interviews that can maximize your case results while keeping your costs down. And if you found this information helpful to you and you're ready to take your firm's witness interviews to the next level, I've got something special for you. It's my free PDF, 6 Steps to More Effective Witness Interviews that maximize your case outcomes. Just click on the link in the description below to download it now and get started today. And if you missed any of the previous videos in this series, you can find a link to those videos in the description below as well. Thanks for tuning in.